We've all experienced that joyous feeling of success in our lives, no matter how small. And it's so sweet that we crave more of it, chasing it whenever we can. However, like Icarus flying too close to the sun, it can all come crashing down at rapid pace, leaving us with naught but a feeling of crippling despair. The same can be said for video game franchises, which spend years, even decades, building a good reputation with fans and critics alike, only to go the way of the dodo. There are myriad reasons why a franchise can die, whether it's poor sales, lack of interest from the developers and publishers, or an absolute stinker of a game that leaves a bad taste in players' mouths. We've been digging through the franchise graveyard to find the games responsible for the series' untimely demises, and though some may have seen releases following these titles, they were merely on life support at that point. Not all these games are bad either, but be prepared for a few which are absolute plops. I'm Ashton from Triple Jump, and here are 10 games that killed their franchise. Number 10, Duke Nukem Forever. Admit it, you knew Duke would be on this list the moment you saw the title, so we thought it best to get this one out of the way at the start of the video. The story of Duke Nukem Forever's development is one of the most infamous in gaming history, given that there was almost 15 years of development drama to endure. A combination of changing developers, engines, and general creative direction left the game in an absolute state, and not worthy of its predecessors. The earlier games had been praised for their humour, which was unlike the other more serious shooters of the time. But by 2011, the references were outdated, and the offensive jokes didn't sit well with critics or players. Even the literal toilet humour couldn't save the Duke. Perhaps if the game had worked well, it could have redeemed itself, but it was too sluggish compared to other contemporary shooters. Far too much emphasis was placed on platforming and crude jokes, rather than the somewhat fun shooting sections. The design was stuck somewhere between modern and retro, not really coming down on one side or the other, and to top it all off, the loading times seemed to last forever. Number 9, Tenchu: Shadow Assassins. The Tenchu series got off to a wonderful start back in 1998 with Tenchu Stealth Assassins for the PS1, garnering 87 out of 100 according to Metacritic. Critics and players alike particularly loved the stealth-based gameplay and non-linear approach to levels, as well as the atmospheric feudal Japan setting. The next two titles were received fairly positively, and then the series took a nosedive, and remained fairly mediocre until Shadow Assassins came along in 2009, which earned a reasonable average review score of 70 for the Wii version. Sadly though, this series had lost sight of what players enjoyed about it in the first place, and the gameplay, which was vastly different to the original titles, disappointed many fans of the franchise, with these stealth segments feeling forced instead of being the main selling point of the game. Despite the slight uptick in form, the damage was already done, and fans had lost faith in the series, which translated to poor sales overall. Unfortunately, for any remaining fans of Tenchu hoping for a new release, it's unlikely one will ever come to fruition, as publishers Ubisoft and From Software lost interest after Shadow Assassins. I suppose they do have other things going on. Number 8, Kane and Lynch 2: Dog Days. A pair of former mercenaries who escaped death row, Adam Kane Marcus and James Seth Lynch, are the playable protagonists of the Kane and Lynch series, games of the third-person shooter variety that really are the kind of titles you either love or hate. Their second outing, Dog Days, is set in Shanghai, and sees the two despicable lads trying to navigate an arms deal and secure enough money to retire. Although the first game, Kane and Lynch Dead Men, wasn't the best game ever made, Dog Days was worse, and its mediocrity sealed the series' fate. The dull and repetitive gameplay was a gripe for many, and felt like an on-rail shooter akin to Time Crisis due to its duck and cover action. The campaign was also particularly short, with many feeling that it was unfinished, and the camera style divided critics as it looked like shaky cam footage, which seemed to upset many, though admittedly this setting could be turned off. The multiplayer mode might have made up for it, but neither of the titular characters were playable for some reason. Not a wise move. IO Interactive lost the rights to the Kane and Lynch franchise back in 2017, and the fact that Square Enix are having much more success elsewhere makes it highly unlikely a third game would ever see the light of day. Number 7, Manhunt 2. Strap yourselves in, lads, lasses and others, because we're on the road to Controversy City once again. This time to see what the Manhunt series has been up to. Gameplay in the Manhunt series boils down to gratuitous violence, moving stealthily through areas and killing people in creative ways, following the instructions of some fairly sinister people, and as such, the series polarised the gaming world. The first Manhunt game, simply titled Manhunt, performed reasonably well in terms of both sales and critical reception. But the sequel was somewhat lacking. Despite improved gameplay and a slightly more interesting story with intriguing plot twists, the game was not well received. The graphics were outdated, poor voice acting took players right out of the experience, and one critic even rather scathingly noticed that the controversy was more interesting than the game itself. Ouch. The grotesque violence was already enough to get the attention of politicians and mainstream media, but unfounded claims of the game inspiring a real-life murder only caused more pearl clutching, and the game was banned in several countries, which presumably hurt sales and meant that no follow-up has ever materialised. In spite of all of this controversy, Rockstar have just about stayed afloat thanks to their moderate success with other franchises. Number 6, SOCOM 4 US Navy SEALs. Put on your best terrain-appropriate camouflage because it's time to take a look at this Dick Mychenko simulator. The SOCOM series has players take on high-profile top-secret missions all over the world, much like the objectives carried out by real-life Navy SEALs. The earlier games in the series were rather good, especially the outings on PS2, but SOCOM 4 received a mixed reception from reviewers with particular criticism aimed at the poor AI in single-player mode. On top of that, the campaign was judged to be bland, lackluster, and not very challenging. Perhaps the game was lacking in the single-player department because developer Zipper Interactive had placed too much emphasis on the game's multiplayer mode, which was a big reason why SOCOM 4 managed to scrape an average review score of 67 on Metacritic. As a side note, the servers for multiplayer were shut down only 3 years after release, so their endeavours arguably weren't even worthwhile. Zipper has now closed, and the SOCOM series never captured enough of an audience for the public to demand a new release. So it seems unlikely we'll see this one returning anytime soon. You might say that this game sealed the series' fate. Got him. Number 5, Driver 3. Driver 3, or Driv 3R if you want to get silly stylization about this, is an open-world action-adventure game where the main focus is obviously on driving, but for some reason, the devs thought it was a good idea to place more of the title's emphasis on gun combat and on foot sections than they did in its predecessors. The reception for the title was not great, and it garnered mixed reviews on all platforms, with the exception of the dire PC port. Criticism was aimed at the clunky on-foot controls, general glitchiness, and the rather scathing accusation that the game was a poor attempt at mimicking the GTA series. The hostiles who resembled Vice City's Tommy Vercetti probably didn't help. Driver 3 was not the final title in the Driver lineup, as it was followed by a couple of equally average games and 2011's well-received Driver San Francisco. A combination of the poor sales and the rise of the little-known competitor we mentioned earlier meant that the wider gaming public had little interest in this series anymore. Many of the folks at Ubisoft Reflections were put to work on the vehicular portions of Watch Dogs instead, and the Driver franchise has seemingly been laid to rest. Number 4, Medal of Honor Warfighter. You may find this hard to believe, but at one time in ancient history, better known as the early 2000s, the Medal of Honor series was one of the frontrunners in the first-person shooter genre. Some of the early titles in the franchise are often mentioned when folks talk about the best video games of all time, and they still have a dedicated audience today. It seems like EA could never capture the magic of the early titles though, as over time, the series got progressively less interesting, and following the release of Warfighter, it never recovered. Warfighter's poor AI, confusing storyline, and regular glitches were all enough to leave a sour taste in the mouth of players. Average review scores in their 50s really were the final nail in the coffin for Medal of Honor, so EA turned their attention towards ruining the Battlefield games instead. Like the Driver series, Medal of Honor was cowering in the shadow of a superior and similar franchise, and in this case, it was Call of Duty. A revival was attempted in 2020 with Medal of Honor Above and Beyond, but it was tremendously average, and as such, a comeback for the series seems unlikely. Number 3, Golden Axe Beast Rider. hop on your favourite cockatrice because we're taking a trip back in time to the days of arcades and wired controllers. The original Golden Axe games didn't perform magnificently with critics, but were highly successful and are still beloved by many to this very day, firmly remaining cult classics. Over a decade after the previous entry into the Golden Axe series, in 2008, developers Secret Level decided to have a crack at adding a third dimension to the franchise, and thus Beast Rider was born. Needless to say, the game didn't go down particularly well, barely scraping an average review score in the mid-40s. The absence of a multiplayer mode and lack of some of the series' beloved characters really upset fans of the original games, with many feeling that this title was only setting up for a sequel, making it feel somewhat incomplete. Furthermore, the game was really boring, which I'm sure we can all agree is not good. There have been rumours of reboots, and a prototype did release on Steam in 2020, but it was so controversy-ridden that the full release never saw a light of day. I guess you could say the series got the axe. Second got him on this list. I am on fire. Number 2, Steel Battalion Heavy Armour. Oh boy, everybody prepare yourselves, because it's time to play with everybody's favourite, well-functioning peripheral, the Xbox Kinect. Over the years, the Steel Battalion series had earned itself something of a cult following, largely owing to the popularity of its big controller that had 44 different input points, allowing for precise and accurate movements. By golly, that sure is a lot of buttons. Then, for some reason, From Software decided that for Heavy Armour, they'd make use of the Kinect, combined with a regular Xbox controller, which naturally upset many fans of the series. What's even the point of releasing a controller that's specifically designed for your franchise if you aren't going to use it? As expected, the Kinect did not work properly, and the game only garnered an average review score of 38 out of 100. The story was as engaging as those in the series' previous entries, but the lack of adequate controls, combined with the cruel checkpoints, meant that sticking around long enough to see it through felt like too much of a chore. Heavy Armour was absolutely dreadful, which truly is a shame as the franchise's first 2 games were so well received. Oh well, I guess that's how it goes sometimes. And number 1, Alone in the Dark Illumination. The original Alone in the Dark was a pioneer of survival horror games, serving as inspiration for the Resident Evil series, and I think we can say the folks at Capcom have done pretty well out of that. Usually, a feature from Nightmare director Uwe Boll would serve as the worst thing about a franchise, but Alone in the Dark Illumination actually managed to outdo him. Well done, Uwe. For once, you're not the absolute worst. Now, admittedly, the Alone in the Dark series was already on a bit of a downhill trajectory, and has never managed to recapture the brilliance of the original, but Illumination's average review score of 19 was just embarrassing, and was absolutely the final nail in the coffin for the franchise. Described as unfinished, broken, and incredibly dull, some felt like it was trying too hard to be a combination of Left 4 Dead and Resident Evil 6, without even coming close to the quality of either, which really is saying something when you remember just how not great Resident Evil 6 was. The IP has been acquired by THQ Nordic, and they are set to release a reimagining of the original, so it remains to be seen whether they can get this one back on track. Still, the series will always be tainted by this absolutely horrific title, and we don't mean horrific in the way the devs probably intended.